On some level, it doesn't matter what framework you use, right? Like as long as you get stuff done, it doesn't matter. But no matter how good you are at code, you can write the best framework in the world, but if only you use it, then it's not going to have that much impact. So at some point, you have to start scaling community beyond code. Internally, it's more about advocating for what users want in the product, building open source tooling and maintaining open source tooling, deciding what the content is, deciding how to frame and weight the content so like it's not too much on any particular thing, because people can look up stuff themselves. They just need to know what exists.
Hey, this is Brian, and you're listening to JAMstack Radio, a bi-weekly series where we discuss the JAMstack, a new way of building websites and apps that are fast, secure, and simple to work with. JAMstack Radio is brought to you by Heavybit, a program dedicated to helping startups take their developer products to market. For more information, visit heavybit.com. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us on Twitter at JAMstack Radio. Welcome to another installment of JAMstack Radio. On the line, we've got Shawn Wang, which I didn't even know what your last name was until we signed up to do this, because I always call you Schwix. So you want to say hello?
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks for having me. And yeah, my initials are SWYX, and I've just had that nickname since I was 13, so I'm perfectly comfortable going by that. Also, there's another Shawn at Netlify, so I didn't want to confuse people, so I just went with Schwix.
That's awesome. And I didn't even realize that, like, not even knowing what your real name was, didn't even know that those were your initials. I thought that was like, I was going to ask you what the background was for that, because I think whenever somebody talks about you online, or even in person, they always say Schwix. They don't actually ever say Shawn. For the longest time, I didn't even know your first name was Shawn until you joined Netlify. So, small world.
I like how some people actually ask me how it's pronounced, and they never get it wrong. So I'm like, there's no other way to pronounce it. So,
Shawn, do you want to say what's your day job? What do you do? And sort of why you're here today?
Sure. I work at Netlify as a developer experience engineer, which is basically your old job, Brian. And I'm not doing as much as you used to do, because you used to just be responsible for everything. Now we have 6 people on this on this team, and
that's awesome. 6 people is what my legacy is.
So yeah, the job is basically, it's a mix of developer advocacy and then sort of internal and external. Like it's external in the sense of tell people that Netlify exists and then what it's good for and why you might want to use it, and show them how to use it with demos and stuff. And then internally, it's more about sort of advocating for what users want in the product, building open source tooling and maintaining open source tooling. For example, I've been picking up on GoTrue, which is the Netlify identity library, and writing React wrappers around it. So it's very easy for React users to use that. Most recently, I did a 4-hour here's how to do everything on Netlify tutorial.
Yeah, that's right.
Which took me a month.
All those 4 hours is a month of worth of your time. That's awesome.
And it's editing, and it's deciding what the content is, deciding how to frame and weight the content so it's not too much on any particular thing, because people can look up stuff themselves. They just need to know what exists. So you did a similar thing. I think it was an hour, 2 hours, where you kind of just go through Netlify. It was a prepared presentation, but also a live demo, and you did that in one take in your garage.
Yeah.
I could not do that.
Yeah, some of the sections were more than one take. I did take some liberty there, but yeah, I was I sort of powered through. I think on a Friday.
Yeah. So I'm aspiring to do that. I'm only about 2 years into this job, but it's definitely a very rewarding job.
Awesome. And I sort of mentioned for the sake of the listener, we had Divya on 7 episodes ago to chat about developer experience in general, and then also chatted a bit about Vue in the community as well. So if you want to listen to episode 44, definitely check that out.
Well, so we kind of split things by community, and we all speak to different parts of the community. Sarah runs the team, so Sarah and Divya speak to the Vue community. I was actually the only React guy for a long time, because I also helped to moderate the r/React.js subreddit on Reddit. But recently we hired Jason Langsdorff, and so now I'm no longer needed. But and then we also hired Tara Meniksik on Angular and Phil's always on the indie web / vanilla HTML, JS, CSS train. So yeah, we try to just address different people as they come into JAMstack.
Yeah, that's awesome, because I personally don't know everything about every front-end JavaScript framework, as well as even I do have one site that I have in production that I leveraged a lot, which is an HTML or sort of HTML / indie web, what Phil would touch. But yeah, I'm by no means an expert, which is why I have you here today to talk about Svelte.
Yeah.
Another thing that I've known about for a long time, I believe Rich Harris is the creator, And I think did it used to be something else, or where did Svelte come from?
Right. So Rich actually had a previous framework called Reactive, and that was the original sort of idea for reactivity in frameworks. I think it kind of was around at the same time as React. And so Reactive actually was responsible for a number of innovations, and most well-known of it is probably the idea that you should have single file components that encapsulate styling as well as templating and all the other JavaScript logic components. Obviously, React has not adopted that, but basically every other framework has that. Svelte is a reinvention of that approach, basically adopting a compiler approach, and that's a lot of the reason for its performance and bundle size, and we can get into all that. But,
like a compiler, as in like Elm? Like how they have a compiler that compiles JavaScript?
Less intense, but
okay.
But philosophically the same thing. So Elm is a full language. Rich Harris also refers to Svelte as a language, but it's more akin to HTML than it is to Haskell. Like Elm is basically very, very much inspired by Haskell. And by the way, if anyone's interested in Elm, definitely go read Evan Czaplicki's Harvard undergrad thesis. I don't even remember my own thesis, but I read his and I was like, this is the most clear elucidation of functional programming I have ever read. And this guy, this kid, just wrote it. Anyway, there are a number of approaches to frameworks, and me being a primarily React person, like my day job is still React, and I've made my career and reputation on React. And I still think it's worth exploring other frameworks, and Svelte has a very different approach, which is compiler-based. And we can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that too. And just like, I'm thinking in my head, like, did I have Elm on the podcast? And I Googled it and I had Elm on the podcast, episode 19. So nice. If you want to go down that rabbit hole and compilers, definitely check that out. But yeah, tell me more about Svelte. So compiler based, but more towards the HTML side. Like, what are some other wins?
Right. So the thing about Svelte is that every single component looks like a mini HTML file. There's this style section if you want it, there's a script section if you want it, and then there's just like regular old HTML elements. And then there's some template syntax for inserting in them, very similar to how Angular and Vue might have it. But the compiler approach basically allows Svelte to cheat at this trade-off between having batteries included and bundle size. Obviously, bundle size is very important for the web. But then for developer experience, you want to have as much provided out of the box as possible. Historically, if you just had everything in the JavaScript bundle, then adding features means adding weight in JavaScript. So by taking a compiler approach, Svelte is able to say, like, okay, we're going to provide a first-class feature for animations, but if you don't use it, we won't include it. And same thing for state management, same thing for CSS. So it's very much like, it's able to do batteries included without the cost of JavaScript embedded in that. So I really like that.
That's interesting. So like, you don't hear many frameworks that have batteries included also care about bundle size, which is interesting that you can get both of those wins. Because like even React, though you create React app, like most people either reject or don't start with create React app at this point. Well, maybe most people do. I haven't talked to most people, to be honest. But yeah, it's just like kind of those like two things, like the age-old programming intro to algorithms questions. Like there's three things, but you can only have two of them. You can't have all three.
Right.
Is Svelte, like, is it all three bundled in one?
I don't know. What are the three? Speed.
Yeah, I was stumbling through like complexity, time, performance. I don't know.
The analogy is kind of strange because we're talking about creating apps for the web instead of traditional programming. So, I'm very heavily involved in the React ecosystem. And I know I'm on top of this because I help beginners on r/React.js. We have a monthly Reddit with a monthly beginners thread, something like 500 questions and answers every month. And I hosted one recently. It's confusing for beginners to have to go and seek out all of these things. So let me just give you like a quick list of like what people in React land typically have to deal with and what is first class in Svelte. So like static scope styling, you typically have to pick from style components, AstroTurf, Linaria, Emotion in React. In Svelte, it's first class. You use the style tag, just like you would in regular HTML. For transitions, you might use something like a React transition group. In Svelte, it's just the transition directive. Animations, you might use React Spring or Framer Motion. Svelte, again, first class. Head management, you might use React Helmet. Class toggling, you might use the class names tag. State management, you might use Redux and MobX. All of these have first class citizens. I also really like the accessibility linting. So because the compiler goes through the AST of your entire app, You can actually just build accessibility warnings into your build instead of having to import like a separate ESLint tooling. So this is this whole idea of collapsing your entire toolchain. You're going to have a build step anyway, right? Especially with the JAMstack. You're going to have a build step. Like let's actually just stick as much in there in a single pass as possible. So the result is that like typically if you do like a create React app, right? Like that's the default standard way to start a React app. Typically it takes about like 5 minutes of installing NPM packages and running them. Do the same thing for Svelte and you'll see how much quicker it is just because there's so much that's baked in and it doesn't duplicate and it just is designed for speed.
That's awesome. So like in my mind, as I'm like crafting where Svelte fits within the ecosystem, like React being on the right side where like create React app, you've got everything, you've got adoption, you've got a lot of like documentation at this point. And then Svelte being on this side where it's got a compiler built in as well. It seems like it's almost like rather not even Svelte being in the middle rather, and then Vue being on the other side. Because a lot of these things that you're mentioning, like adding tags to your components for opting in functionality, it sounds like a lot of stuff that I like about Vue and a lot of stuff what I heard about Vue as well.
Yeah, I actually put Svelte on the far end, even beyond Vue, because So for example, SSR meta framework. So a lot of JavaScript frameworks only take care of JavaScript rendering, right? But for SEO and performance, you want to do some server-side rendering. Vue doesn't handle that first class. You have to rely on something like a VuePress or a Nuxt, which are third-party teams that are maintaining that. Same for React, you have Gatsby and Next.js. But Svelte actually recommends Sapper as a first-party thing, like the same core team maintains that. So that severe degree of vertical integration throughout the entire stack goes even into the SSR meta framework, which is important for tooling to know about each other.
Yeah, so is there like an option if I'm a React dev today and I'm doing a bunch of React sites and I'm reacting every weekend on side projects, is there an option to sort of like piecemeal and like transition into Svelte or try it out? Like what are the resources out there?
Well, the resources are primarily the Svelte tutorial. So the docs are actually pretty good for something that is a side project of like 4 people, right? Like if you compare like the Vue core team is like 30 something people, the React team is like 8 people, full time on this thing. Let's face facts. It's a side project of certain people, but the docs are actually really good. They have a full tutorial that steps you through a REPL, because every compiler should have a REPL showing you the before and after of what you write. And it's literally like any other framework. I would say React and Vue and every framework does this, where you just give it element to mount on, and it just takes over from there, right?
Yeah.
So if you want to interoperate between frameworks, that's the way to do it. I would actually preach the other approach where you should start most pages with Svelte first and only add React once you need it, because React has the heavier runtime that's about 100 kilobytes uncompressed, whereas Svelte, you can get it down to as low as 9. So that's a very nice way to think about like, how do you want to set up your sites? Which typically, like my current tagline for what I would recommend people is to say, basically Svelte for sites and React for apps. Like if you're primarily building something where you're giving people information and just a little bit of interactivity, let's say for like a login system, a checkout, persisting some options, use Svelte because like the bundle size is so much smaller. But if you're going to have that runtime, if you're going to make a progressive web app or like a React Native thing across multiple platforms, go ahead and use React. And to me, that makes a lot of sense.
Wow, that's a good tagline. Hopefully that makes it in the tagline section for JAMstack, the radio site. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And like, it's encouraging to hear that because like at the moment, I'm not really building a lot of apps. I'm building a lot of one-off sites and leveraging a lot of like APIs to produce data and then some functions to keep that data alive. And that's like, at the moment, that's my jam because everything I do is a side project at this point at my current role. So really cool to hear.
Yeah. We're talking about JAMstack Radio, and like I feel like I've been doing this job 2 years. You've been doing it longer. They're just very different concerns when you think about building sites versus building apps. Once you start building apps, actually these concerns about JavaScript weight don't really matter because the alternative is like a very, very heavy native app, right?
Yeah.
So load the full featured runtime with the ecosystem that's heavily supported. But if you're doing sites, then obviously performance especially on low-end mobile devices, you got to care about. But I don't want to make it just about performance. I think Svelte, the syntax is the lowest that I've ever seen. So, for example, I've been transitioning some React apps that I used to have, like personal apps, and I just rewrote them in Svelte just to get a feel, right? To learn. You typically get about 20 to 30% less code just because Svelte embraces sugar syntax and mutability. So for example, in React, you have to use like a React use state hook, and then you have to set state somewhere, and it's asynchronous, and it's like this whole callback process. In Svelte, you assign, you just the variable equals new value. That's it. So it just logically cannot get less than that. And the less syntax you have, the less code that you write, the less bugs. And that's a lot of what Rich Harris is preaching. For me, actually, the sugar syntax is more important. React, for example, eschews two-way binding, like it's like data down, events up, for example, which means that for writing forms, it's hard in React. Like anyone who's written a good form in React is like, all right, I need a form management library for this. And that's why you reach for Redux form or Formic. In Svelte, it's just two-way binding all the way. And then you just validate and submit in your submission handlers, and that's about it. It kind of is what it used to be, I think.
Yeah, it sounds like maybe Svelte had some time to make a decision that everybody's sort of been struggling with and say, okay, let's not go down this rabbit hole.
Yeah. One of the things that I'm actively exploring is some of these ideas don't have to belong to Svelte alone. Svelte, a lot of Vue, took the idea of single file components from Svelte. I think we can take this idea of a compiled language to React to say all right, these are super common cases and we end up having to import so many libraries just to handle this stuff. What if we just introduce a bit more syntax and just make our lives a lot easier? So that's something I'm actively exploring as well.
Yeah, so I'm curious, and going back to your mention of the maintainers of Svelte being their side project, I'm curious of who are these people and who is using Svelte today, knowing that this is this may or may not be a side project for some of these maintainers.
Yeah, that's a fair concern. It's actually a bunch of Brits. It's Rich Harris and his gang. Obviously, Rich and his entire desk at the New York Times use it. So if you see any data viz in the New York Times, it's probably Svelte.
Cool.
Obviously, performance, especially on mobile, is a big concern for them. And Rich has a long history because he's also responsible for Rollup and some other smaller libraries. It's the same group of maintainers that kind of follow along the philosophy.
Oh, okay. I didn't know the correlation between Rollup and Svelte. I know a maintainer on Rollup, but I didn't know Rich was behind it.
Yeah, he created it.
Excellent.
Obviously, there's a good team of people. I actually don't know their real names. I only know their GitHub handles.
Yeah. Fair enough.
They're pretty awesome, and it's growing. Svelte actually. So I've been criticizing Svelte as well because it used to be a small core team of 4 people, but now they've expanded a lot as well. So it is what it is. I actually have been thinking about this. No matter how good you are at code, you can write the best framework in the world, but if only you use it, then it's not going to have that much impact. So at some point, you have to start scaling community beyond code, and it's about maintaining triaging issues. It's the really boring stuff that just has to get done, documenting, having meetups, demos, doing talks, all that meta language. That's what Cheng Liu from the Reason core team calls it. It's the meta language around the language. So it's definitely entering that phase where it's starting to grow community more than code.
Yeah, 30,000 stars on a project that I've known of but never tried for quite a few years is pretty surprising. I'm just checking out the repo now.
Yeah, there are other users. I actually don't know them off the top of my head, but on the community side, we maintain a bunch of who uses Svelte, and it's just a bunch of logos. But it doesn't really tell you much, right?
Yeah.
Apple actually has recently started hiring people specifically for Svelte. So
interesting.
Yeah, there's a Twitter handle, Svelte Jobs, where you can see the people who are actually specifically hiring for this stuff. And something that is really close to heart, because on some level, it doesn't matter what framework you use, right? As long as you get stuff done, it doesn't matter. But for devices that are low power, that actually need that performance, then the bundle size of Svelte starts actually mattering a lot. One of the use cases that Rich Harris talks about in his Svelte 3 talk, Rethinking Reactivity, you should definitely link that in the show notes. But basically, he was talking about how a major payments provider in Brazil uses this in embedded devices to provide a nice UI, and then that is all Svelte.
Okay. And then you alluded to you're part of the Svelte community as well?
I guess informally. yes. I run it. But it's weird because this is not my job. It's just I'm doing this for fun because I think that it's more challenging for me at my stage in my career to think about community rather than code. And I think that's something that I actually got from you, where you're okay, you're a developer advocate for GitHub. You can go around the world doing talks all the live long day, but that's not going to scale. That's you only have 365 days a year.
Yeah.
But how do you extend the community work beyond that so that you enable other people to do that work? And it's more authentic coming from them, right? If it's just fellow users, GitHub pays your checks. and you're an expert, right? Like you might not be able to speak to certain communities just because you no longer belong to those, or you never were. And so I think enabling other people to speak about your stuff is actually a good goal for someone who's organizing a community. So that's what I did. So, I helped to set up the Svelte community site, and also in New York, helping to set up the Svelte Society meetup, which is basically a conference and a meetup series similar to Vue Vixens, and just trying to get more people excited and creative. I think that's something that I really enjoy about the community, because every other framework, a lot of people have to learn the framework for work. And so they're very interested in like enterprise, we call this like enterprise React, like take React, like add TypeScript onto it, add Redux, like add all that junk. And it's no longer fun. People just don't like mess around with stuff. And so Svelte is very much focused on like quick and easy to get going. And then it's got animations built in, and you can make very delightful apps. And it's just a joy to play with.
You mentioned the Svelte docs around where to learn. Like if I want to get started with Svelte today and I'm a listener, like where's my first step?
Yeah, svelte.dev. That's the main site that you land on. You'll quickly go into the tutorials. So you can either check out the tutorials, or if you learn a different way, if you're more of like I want to see what the big idea is, definitely check out his talks. Rich gave 3 talks last year, basically detailing each of the elements of Svelte and how it compares to other frameworks. I'm the kind of guy, I learn from big picture down. So if you're that kind of guy, look out for Rethinking Reactivity from Rich Harris. And then also you can join us in the community. So Discord is where most of the users hang out. The community site for Svelte is where people show like repos and third-party libraries and stuff like that. Svelte Society is the meetup series. There are events happening all over the world, and obviously contribute on GitHub.
Excellent. What was the thing you kicked off with, Svelte for sites and React for apps?
Yeah.
I'm definitely going to try out Svelte this weekend for sure on one of my projects I'm working on.
Nice. You should check it out.
Yeah. So with that being said, we're going to transition to picks. These are jam picks, things that we're jamming on. It could be music, food, et cetera, et cetera. But with that being said, I'll go ahead and go first because I got 3 picks actually that I'm super, super excited about. So first off, I just launched a site, one of the projects I'm working on at GitHub. It's called githubhackathon.com. And it's going to be focused around GitHub Actions. So if you are at all familiar with GitHub Actions or not, definitely check it out. It is a JAMstack site too as well. So it's like my first public-facing JAMstack site that I get to be a part of. So check out githubhackathon.com. I also want to mention this new documentary on Netflix called Hip Hop Evolution. And like I just came back from Brussels, which sounds like really funny to say out loud, but I was there for FOSDEM, downloaded this documentary on hip hop evolution, and I was just blown away because if anybody's seen my talks in the last couple of years, they're very heavily hip hop influenced. At this talk where I talk about GraphQL and gangster rap and going through that. And the crazy part, if you took the GraphQL out of that, it's basically episode 2 of this documentary. So episode 2 and 3. Yeah, so I was just blown away, like all this context that I've been sort of trying to talk about code with. It's like right here in this series. But with that being said, I also realized I got some things wrong. So if you do go in like my talk and I talk about the history of hip hop, I missed some very key figures that I had no idea existed. And the thing I like about this series is that it actually talks about the beginning, like the non-recorded hip hop, which is something that I forget existed. They go into even to that detail because I only know all the stuff that was on my Napster in middle school. So I missed all that stuff. So with that being said, I got one more thing, which is mutualfund.io, which is a TLD that I've owned for way too long, and I finally am doing something with it. And I am live streaming. So thanks to Jason Langsdorff, I ended up doing a live stream with him on GitHub Actions and got super excited about getting back into live streaming again. So I've been live streaming building one of my projects. So it's mutualfund.io. I'm building a JAMstack site again and it's live and it's open source as well. So the goal is to start doing like a lot of my work, live streaming it, the stuff that I can. And then if you want to help me build a community around watching me code and hopefully and also have other people on. So if you want to come and live stream with me, I'll do that a bit, but I think I'm mainly not going to like encroach in Jason's space and mainly just be working on my projects in open source. So Shawn, do you have any picks?
Yeah, sure. So I do think that we should all build more sites with Svelte. So I actually wrote a static site generator and it's called SSG because I've learned how to name squat on NPM. It's actually disturbingly easy. I don't think it should be this easy, but you just send NPM a request that like, hey, no one's using this. Can I have it? And they give it.
Yeah, I think there was a blog post about this, the whole FPAD thing and the name squatting, but yeah. for sure.
So it stands for Svelte Site Generator, but whatever. I just got the name SSG. So my site's in it, Swix.io, and you can see how lightweight a production Svelte site can be. I also have been recently getting into styling scroll bars. This is actually the subject of today's blog post. I'm trying to blog every day. So I'm not a streamer.
Oh, nice.
Blogging is just like less stress for me. So did you know that you can style scroll bars? Did you know that you can like put little hearts on them? So if you go to my site right now, I put little hearts on my scroll bars, and then I made the actual button for the scroll bar transparent so you can see through it. And it's just like a really nice fancy effects. I picked this up from CSS Tricks, and I just think that it's an underutilized part of the platform.
I would say that I haven't styled a scroll bar since MySpace.
Why not, right?
For sure.
And then I think for my fun pick, I'm going to pick Tiny Desk concerts. Like, there are people who don't know about them, and they're missing out because it's NPR. It's sort of like live, like unplugged performances from really like top line singers and performers. And I'm ashamed to admit that that's where I discovered Lizzo.
So I'm laughing because like her Tiny Desk concert is like so much different from her, I guess, summer that she had last year with all her songs. But yeah, it was really good.
Right. Like that's the thing. Like you get to see these stars, huge stars who are typically on like a giant stage with like 50,000 fans. You see them in like a tiny room with a tiniest desk and with like 30 people. And it's a very intimate setting. And I really love that. So
yeah, I highly recommend as well because there was one where Dave Chappelle introed. It was like one of his friends who plays harmonica.
Yeah.
That was amazing.
But it has a good diversity. It's not just American music. It's also Middle Eastern stuff, African stuff, which like I don't even, I don't remember the name of it, but I loved it because like they just bring their joy, and music is just, it speaks to everyone without having a language, which is awesome.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. There's a local Oakland artist, Fantastic Negrito. Anyway, he was local. I never heard of him, and then I saw him on Tiny Desk, and then like I ended up like seeing him around Oakland, which was like super super funny. Yeah. But yeah, highly recommend that. It's like my Saturday morning cleaning YouTube.
It's probably the top perk of working at NPR that you get to go to Tiny Desk in person.
Yeah. Oh, also the T-Pain one too as well. If anybody knows T-Pain.
T-Pain, he can sing.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah, he's been lying to us all these years, but yeah, he ended up singing acoustic, like Buy Me a Drink.
He started, he was like, yeah, I got the auto-tune in my throat now. So,
yeah.
So that's my jam.
Excellent. Well, Shawn, thanks for coming on and talking about Svelte and also sharing your picks. Also going to be like definitely hooking up to your RSS. And listeners, keep spreading the jam. That's all the time we have for today. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, or if you'd like to suggest a topic, find us on Twitter at JAMstack Radio. To learn more about Heavybit, visit heavybit.com. And while you're there, check out their library. It's packed with amazing talks on sales, marketing, product, and general management from founders of developer tools companies and other industry leaders.